space where that is, kind of more accessible and respectful to other visitors in the area. If you're out hiking the Adirondacks, blasting your speakers, likely going to be, disturbing for not only other visitors, but also wildlife. So finding, maybe a local park where that's more kind of what is, what people like to do there. So finding that space and place for everybody, but also exactly thinking about what it is that you're going out there for, and how you can ensure that you're providing the best experience, not only for yourself, but for other people around you.
Absolutely. So we had a very successful hike up Mt Marcy. That was very enjoyable. So now you guys actually hiked Mt Marcy. You came here last year in 2019. I know that you were at the Adirondack Mountain Club. So what was the reason for that, and what did you guys do when you came up here? What was your experience up here?
Yeah, so we visited the high peaks as part of our hotspot program. So Leave No Trace conducts hotspots across the country, and these are areas that are the land managers in the area will fill out sort of an application to become a hotspot, and these are areas that are receiving particularly heavy impacts from multiple, whether it's heavy just heavy usage, or maybe they're just like looking for some different resources. Like they've done everything that they can do to mitigate the impacts that they are seeing, so they're looking for outside consultation from the Leave No Trace Center. So the High Peaks was one of those places, and so we were able to visit there as a team and just sort of work with the land managers, talk to them, and experience what were the impacts that they were seeing, which at the time was including heavy traffic congestion on Route 73, lots of illegal parking at trailheads, litter, human waste, toilet paper on the trails.
As we talked about.
Trail widening, erosion due to visitors, avoiding the rough and muddy or rocky terrain on the trails. And then also, as we mentioned, the spread of invasive aquatic species, dog waste left at trailheads in bags, etc. And so we went there, were able to experience these, and then also work with them on, okay, what is the best approach? What specifically can be met with education? Because at the end of the day, we're here to provide education, but we're not able to enforce any sort of rules. But we're also there as consultation to be able to maybe make some recommendations on perhaps there could be some rule changes. And so from our 8 days there, we were able to provide a report, which then had those recommendations, including our education recommendations, and then also any sort of law enforcement tweaks.
Yeah, so following our time in the Adirondacks, Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics was retained as a consultant to look more broadly at opportunities within the entire Adirondack Park, since we were focused more in the high peaks. So later last September, Ben Lawhon, the Director of Education and Research for the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics, spent 4 days conducting a site visit and meetings with stakeholders across the Adirondacks. And so out of his time in that visit, he produced an extensive report that is over 100 pages long. And from that report, he came out with 52 specific recommendations made for the Adirondack Park that fell under a variety of categories, including management and planning, research and monitoring, tourism and marketing, social media, partnerships and coordination, group use and Adirondack challenges, such as the 46er Challenge, outreach and education, training, the DEC, and infrastructure. So that report is accessible through the Adirondack Council. Maybe we can link that. And it's just another great way for visitors and individuals alike to learn more about what the Adirondack Park is doing as a whole to really implement Leave No Trace into the parks and the entire Adirondacks.
Oh, I'll definitely put a link to that in the show notes here on the page for sure. So now going with, the education conversation, because that's clearly what everything comes down to, and up here, I mean, when you listed all those problems that we have up here, it was just like, man, this place sounds terrible. But I promise you, it's not that bad hearing all those things like laid out like in a line like that. But with education, so especially now in 2020, obviously so many more people are getting outdoors all around the country, and people who have never really spent time outdoors, and they're not familiar with the way to recreate via, the Leave No Trace lifestyle in a sense. How do you get that education out to a new hiker who isn't familiar with it? What are techniques that you guys are using and that you are encouraging places to implement? Because I do know, there's Leave No Trace signs pretty much everywhere, it seems like these days, especially on the trails and at the popular trailheads. But it's also kind of a challenge to get people to read signs when they're about to start their hike. That's not what's going through their mind. They just want to sign in and be gone. So what is your kind of technique to gently educate people who might not be familiar with these principles when out on the trail in particular?
Yeah, that is a great question.
So something that we have found through our research is that, there are 5 steps to the recreation process. The first one is you're at home, you're planning, you're getting ready to go on your trip. Second step, you're on your way to your destination. Third, you are on site. Fourth, you're on your way home. And then 5, you're reflecting on the trip. And so right now, most information that people get about, like site-specific information, especially when it comes to Leave No Trace information, that is all happening in the 3rd step, which is on site. So as you said, people reading those signs, and oftentimes, say you've been driving for a few hours, you get there, you're kind of eager to get on the trail, maybe you're not going to read that sign. So that 3rd step is just missed, and then that information isn't getting there. So whatever we can do to make sure that information is getting there during that first phase, which is, when they are at home planning ahead and preparing. So doing our best to make sure that, that information is being spread through online resources. Specifically, social media is a really big outlet for that.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. I actually started this whole podcast to try to get people in that number 2 phase, as you mentioned, when driving to the trailheads. That is one of the big reasons I just started this podcast in general, was for that exact reason. And it's been very useful, and that's a big reason I have you guys on the podcast right now. Hopefully this information will get to them in that phase 2 on their way to the trailhead moments. So now another quick question then. You could talk to me as people from Leave No Trace, or you could talk to me as just Monika and Dave, but people who hear the information, they know the information, and they just don't care. What do you do with that sort of situation? In your opinion, there's some people that I use the phrase, they just can't be saved because they just don't seem to want to care about the outdoors, but it's hard to create a desire within them to want to care about the outdoors more than just, I'm going on my hike, this is about me, and whatever happens, I don't care about anything else. So it's hard to really kind of deal with those kind of attitudes out there. And you see it all over the country from people, being not so gracious to our outdoor spaces. So how do you kind of approach people that kind of take that mentality into the outdoors?
That is a great question. It's not one that has a simple answer for sure. As someone that has, worked within environmental education for my entire working career, and Dave and I both actually have degrees in environmental education, a huge part of offering education about how to take care of the natural world really just comes with that patience and offering education and just planting that seed and letting it grow. We have talked to people all over the country, and there are times that we definitely get that pushback. And so what we offer is to just, be patient and be kind and meet people where they are at. Because the best way that we can provide education is by not only taking the time to be kind and give people the benefit of the doubt, but really understand what matters to them. And then to further go ahead and explain the natural functioning of the ecosystems and how what they're doing, their actions can create impacts that can negatively affect the ecosystems that they're in and lead to the that ecosystem not being sustainable for the future for them to be able to enjoy. So whether or not they're not thinking about the people around them, or just don't really have that education, our research has shown that the majority of people that are out there creating impacts, they really, they're not doing it out of malicious behavior. It's not that they want to create those impacts. It really comes down to the fact that they're missing that key piece of education. And our research has shown that 9 out of 10 people are uninformed about Leave No Trace that go outdoors. So it's really, as a center that's all about education rooted in research, it's for us, just imagine what the world would look like if we all practiced Leave No Trace. So it really comes down to just being patient, being kind, giving each other that benefit of the doubt, and taking that time to explain the why of those natural processes. So it's not, there's never one cure-all answer, unfortunately, but it is all about working together and having as many people kindly sharing and offering to help each other and learn from one another as we possibly can.
Yeah, and as Monika said, really knowing that and explaining that why. There's a paper that we've had access to that was showing that people are 5 times more likely to change their behavior if they understand the why behind their actions, as opposed to just hearing it as a rule.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much. I mean, you said, it's not an easy answer, but you gave so much good information, Monika, in that response to that subject matter. And it's been a big issue up here, and I talk about it on the podcast every so often. But I find that you have to be kind first and foremost. I'm sure you guys have heard the phrase "leave no trace" shaming. It's happens on social media, and I think it's absolutely the worst way to go about informing anyone, because it just kind of causes problems and fighting. But I find that if you're out on the trail and you come across people who are not being so kind to the woods, or not abiding by the principles that you've laid out, and you just kind of talk to them and not even teach them anything, just let them see, just have a conversation. I mean, we're humans after all. Just have a conversation and let them see how much joy you get from this area. I do genuinely think when people explain and just have a general conversation, they can just see the joy and the passion that you have for the outdoors, that it's contagious, and it, whether they might not be so easy to just toss their wrapper on the ground now when they're done, or, oh, this fell out of their pack, 10 steps behind you. You know what? I am going to go pick that up, because I kind of feel and understand what that person was talking about when they were just telling me about how much they love this area. I think that's the approach to take with people, is let them see your example, lead by example, and let your love for a place kind of shine through. I think that's the best way to go about it, and not kind of shaming people, which ultimately happens so often. But of course, it's a social media faceless type of a conversation that happens online these days. So I think that's just kind of comes with the territory, but I do not think it's the correct way to go about fixing that sort of subject matter. But I really appreciate what you said. I think you hit so many good topics and ways to gently educate people who might not be as educated in the subject matter that you are. So I appreciate that. Now, what would you say to hikers or people who are going outdoors for the first time? What would be, if you could give them one piece of advice, what would that be?
I love all of your questions. I would say I would say that really you don't need all the fancy gear. Do take the time and do the research about the area so that you're prepared. But there's ways that we can make the outdoors accessible for everybody. And that's going to take all of us working together. But there's likely a friend that you can potentially borrow, backpack from, if that's a barrier for you. If you are planning on staying overnight and you can't have a campfire, seeking out a camp stove that you can potentially rent or borrow from somebody. And knowing that you don't have to have all the fanciest gear and equipment to go out, but you do need this leave no trace education to ensure that you don't create so many impacts. It will vary based on the environment that you're in, for sure. So taking that time to learn about the rules and regulations, the weather, the terrain, and the food and water, that the amount that you'll need, and all those types of things to plan ahead and prepare. But knowing that there is kind of that intimidating feeling when you're going out for the first time, that it's totally normal to be scared, but that we got you at the Leave No Trace Center. Come over, learn from